Hey guys, tonight we descend into a secret world few have dared to breathe in. The dark art of surviving burial alive. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and the current time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie in a narrow wooden box, the scent of aged oak pressing against your skin, earth waiting patiently above to seal you from the world. The air is thin, stolen by the soil that weighs heavy like a stone grave on your chest. Yet, somewhere in the whispers of medieval monasteries, there lurks a forgotten knowledge, a skill once passed from hand to trembling hand, how to breathe while buried alive. The ancients called it the silent breath, a strange art not merely of lungs but of the soul itself, entwined with prayer and shadow. In a time when death was as close as your own heartbeat, and coffins sometimes became prisons rather than sanctuaries, this skill was both a desperate hope and a dark curse. This skill was known by those who feared the cruel mistake of premature burial, a fate more common than you might suspect. Medieval Europe was no stranger to the terror of waking beneath the soil, a final stillness that sometimes was only the beginning. Records from dusty archives tell of monks who trained themselves to slow their breath, to shrink their need for oxygen until it became a whisper, a ghost sigh barely stirring the air. It was not just survival, it was an exercise in control, a communion with the void where every inhale could be your last, and every exhale a prayer for deliverance. The air in your coffin is no longer a friend but an adversary, slipping away like sand through trembling fingers. And in this darkness your mind races. Are you already dead, or still caught between the fading light and eternal night? The medieval world grappled with death's mysteries, and breath was at the center of it all. Was the breath the spark of life, the soul's vessel, or merely a bodily function? The question haunted theologians and scholars alike, stirring debates cloaked in secrecy and fear. To breathe beneath the earth was to walk the thin line between this world and the next, where the living and dead blurred. The monks who mastered this art were not mere survivors. They were bearers of an ancient ritual, an obscure rite whispered only in candlelit cells and forgotten scripts. You can almost hear their fragile voices echoing in the darkness. Hold fast to the breath. Let it guide you through the soil's embrace. And so, the first lesson begins: how to become one with the air you have left, the silent breath that might save your soul. You feel your chest tighten, the weight of the earth above pressing like the hands of ghosts determined to silence you forever. Yet, as the ancient monks taught, your breath must become a shadow, light, silent, almost non-existent. This is no ordinary breathing. It is an art of invisibility, where each inhale is measured, deliberate, a soft drawing of the world's last air through the narrow corridors of your lungs. In these whispered lessons, the breath is not a frantic gasp but a slow, controlled wave, like the tide barely touching a forgotten shore. You learn to slow your heartbeat, to quiet the desperate panic clawing at your mind, until your presence in this dark grave is like a fading mist, nearly erased from the world above. The medieval texts describe a ritual to teach this mastery, the breath of shadows. It was part breathing exercise, part meditation, and part sacred invocation. Monks would retreat to cramped, dark crypts, sealing themselves away with only a thin reed to the outside air. They chanted softly, a low hum blending with the rhythm of their breaths, invoking saints and spirits to guide their lungs to silence. The belief was that breath was intertwined with spirit. If your breath faltered or screamed, your soul might be torn from the body, lost in the liminal space between life and death. But if you mastered the breath of shadows, your spirit remained anchored, able to endure the suffocating silence, waiting for salvation or the slow mercy of death. This ritual was more than physical endurance. It was a communion with the void, a bridge between the living world and the unseen. Yet scholars debate endlessly what the monks truly believed. Some say it was a practical guide to avoid premature burial's horrors. Others argue it was a mystical rite to prepare the soul for death's journey. Theologians questioned whether breath was merely a sign of life or a sacred gift from God, a divine spark residing in the lungs. Was suffocation a punishment, or a passage? This debate haunted monasteries for centuries. Some texts speak of breath as the anima, the very essence of the soul, while others dismiss it as a fleeting, material sign of bodily function. This unresolved mystery shrouds the ritual in shadows. Was it a desperate survival tactic, or a sacred rite meant to tame the inevitability of death? In this question, you find the heart of the skill. Breathing while buried alive was never just about air. It was about wrestling with fate itself, whispering to the darkness, and clinging to the fragile thread of life when all else has been swallowed. The walls close in, rough wood and packed earth pressing hard against your skin, every inch a silent reminder of your confinement. Your body curls instinctively, limbs folded in the coffin's cramped embrace, like a seed shrinking to survive winter's bite. The coffin is no sanctuary, it is a narrow prison carved from hope and terror. The air grows thinner still, every breath a fragile theft from the grave's cold clasp. Your senses sharpen, every sound magnified in the hush, the distant drip of water through stone, the faint rustle of earth settling. In this suffocating silence, your breath becomes a sacred secret, a fragile thread holding you tethered to life's flickering flame. The space is merciless and finite. To breathe is to defy the earth itself, to push back against the closing dark. The medieval manuals speak of the coffin as both crucible and altar, where mastery of breath was tested against physical and spiritual limits. Monks instructed that the key was not only the breath itself but the body's posture, legs drawn tight, shoulders relaxed, head tilted slightly to create the smallest pocket of air around the mouth and nose. This was called the narrow breath posture, a technique designed to minimize oxygen use and delay the crushing onset of suffocation. Some whispered that monks would place small amulets or herbs inside the coffin, believed to ward off evil spirits or purify the air, blending practical survival with mystical protection. The boundary between medicine and magic blurred in these rites, as the living sought to outwit the grave with science wrapped in prayer. Yet scholars puzzle over these practices. Was the narrow breath posture a practical method born of experience, or a metaphor for spiritual submission? Theological debates lingered on whether bodily control was a sign of divine grace or human arrogance tempting fate. Some mystics argued that to control one's breath in death was to challenge God's will, while others claimed it was a humble act of faith, embracing death with quiet dignity. This unresolved tension permeated the manuscripts and sermons, leaving behind a mystery as dense as the soil pressing down on you now. Your breath, slow and measured, is both an act of rebellion and surrender, a whispered prayer caught between body and spirit, between life and the cold silence below. Buried in the shadowed archives of monasteries long crumbled to dust lie the fragile pages of medieval manuals that speak in cryptic ink about survival beneath the earth. These texts, seldom spoken of aloud, are riddled with strange diagrams and symbols, half scientific sketches of lung capacities, half arcane sigils meant to ward off the encroaching silence. The manuscripts, written by monks both terrified and fascinated by death, outline breathing exercises designed to slow the pulse and conserve the precious air trapped within a coffin's confines. These were not merely guides for the body but for the spirit, blending natural philosophy with prayerful supplication, a tacit acknowledgement that the grave was as much a spiritual challenge as a physical one. To read these manuals is to glimpse a lost world where survival was woven with mysticism, where breath was both a tool and a talisman. Within these pages lies a ritual called the Vitae Respira, a sequence of controlled breaths and whispered prayers said to synchronize the soul's rhythm with the slow decay of the earth. Monks wrote of it with reverence, insisting it was not for the faint-hearted or those lacking faith. The ritual demanded not only discipline but an intimate understanding of one's body and its limits. A reed pipe or hollow bone was sometimes used to aid in drawing air discreetly, channeling breath through a thin conduit to delay suffocation. But these implements were rare, and many relied solely on will and prayer. The manuscripts speak of times when novices would practice buried shallowly, testing their endurance and learning to tame the panic that surged with each gasping breath. This blending of corporeal training and spiritual rite marks the medieval manual as a bridge between the earthly and the divine. Yet scholars remain divided on the true purpose of these manuals. Were they practical handbooks for those fearing premature burial, or allegorical texts meant to prepare the soul for its final journey? Some theologians suspect these writings were heretical, flirting with forbidden knowledge of manipulating life's sacred breath. Others suggest they represent early medical experiments, precursors to modern understandings of respiration and suffocation. The ambiguity fuels a dark fascination. These manuals are part survival guide, part spiritual cipher, locked in a mystery centuries old. As you feel the weight of soil above and your lungs crave the fading air, you realize you are holding in your chest not just breath, but a fragment of this ancient enigma, a whisper from the past that refuses to be silenced. The air grows thick with silence as you begin the ritual of the quiet breath, a solemn dance between body and void whispered through the corridors of time. This rite, lost to the clamor of centuries, was a delicate fusion of breath control and sacred invocation, a silent plea to forces both earthly and divine. Monks intoned barely audible prayers, weaving ancient words with the rhythm of their slowing lungs, creating a fragile harmony that seemed to coax the very soil to grant them mercy. The ritual demanded absolute stillness, every inhale drawn with reverence, every exhale a surrender to the weight above. It was said that mastering this rite tethered the soul to the body, preventing it from slipping into oblivion, caught instead in a liminal realm where salvation might find it. The ritual involved positioning the body in a way that minimized air consumption, aligning the spine and neck so breath could flow with the gentlest whisper. Herbs like lavender and rue were placed near the face, their scent believed to purify the stale coffin air and guard against malignant spirits drawn to suffocation's despair. This was no mere physical exercise but a spiritual shield, an invocation of angels and saints to watch over the breathing prisoner beneath the earth. It is whispered that some monks carry talismans inscribed with cryptic runes, their power to be invoked silently with each breath, binding breath and spirit in a sacred pact. The ritual of the quiet breath was at once a prayer, a survival technique, and a fragile hope cast against the inevitability of darkness. Yet the theological debates surrounding this ritual were as intense as the darkness in which it was performed. Some argued the rite was a sacred act of submission, accepting death's embrace with dignity and faith. Others feared it was hubris, an attempt to cheat the divine order by prolonging the inevitable. Did the breath hold divine grace, or was it merely the fragile remnant of mortal flesh clinging to life? These questions echoed through monastery halls and cloistered libraries, unresolved and shrouded in mystery. The ritual of the quiet breath remains an enigma, a dance of shadow and spirit whispered in darkness, a forgotten thread of hope for those entombed alive, suspended between earth and eternity. Your lungs, though tight and aching, begin to remember the slow pulse of the earth itself. The monks taught that true mastery came from syncing your breath to the rhythms beneath your coffin, the distant drip of water, the subtle shifting of soil, the barely perceptible hum of the living world above. It was said that the lungs could learn to breathe like stone and earth, inhales long and languid, exhaled with the patience of a buried seed. This wasn't mere survival, it was transformation, an ancient communion with the very bones of the earth that held you captive. To breathe like the earth was to become a part of its slow, eternal decay, a whisper fading into shadow and dust. Monastic training involved exercises in quiet caves and cramped crypts where novices were forced to hold their breath for unimaginable lengths of time. They learned to expand their rib cages in shallow, silent draws, minimizing oxygen consumption and slowing the pulse that would betray their presence. This was the essence of the forgotten skill, lungs that remembered the earth's slow breath, the cadence of stones settling over centuries. The monks believed this rhythmic breath also carried spiritual significance. By mimicking the earth's own sigh, they aligned their souls with the divine cycle of death and rebirth, embracing a fate that was both terrifying and sacred. The lungs became not just organs of survival but instruments of transcendence. Yet this idea sparked scholarly debate through centuries. Was this lung training a mere physical discipline, or did it represent a theological metaphor for surrender and rebirth? Some questioned whether the lungs' mimicry of Earth's breath symbolized the soul's return to the divine dust, while others saw it as a dangerous blending of the mortal and sacred realms. Medical treatises of the time acknowledged the physical benefits, but warned of spiritual peril. Breathing like the earth risked losing oneself in the tomb's silence forever. The mystery remains unresolved. Breath that once tethered life could also bind it to endless darkness. As you draw this slow, earth-like breath, you feel caught in that fragile balance, suspended between endurance and oblivion. The darkness around you hums softly as you begin to murmur the whispered prayers taught in the deepest cloisters, those barely audible chants that blur the line between breath and spirit. The monks believed that breath was more than air moving in and out. It was a sacred vessel carrying the soul's essence, a bridge between the corporeal and the divine. Each whispered word vibrates through the narrow space, mingling with your slow, measured breathing, creating an ethereal symphony of sound and silence. The faint echoes ripple like spectral wings, weaving a protective veil against the creeping despair that threatens to choke your spirit. In this union of breath and prayer, the boundary between body and soul thins, and you feel yourself suspended in a liminal realm where salvation might still find you. The ritual of breath and prayer was inseparable, a dance of quiet surrender and fierce hope. Monks recited ancient psalms and invocations softly, their voices barely rising above the hush, believing these words sanctified each breath and anchored their spirits in the living world. It was said that breath without prayer was hollow, a fragile gasp doomed to fade quickly into eternal silence. By intertwining breath with whispered sacred chants, the trapped soul might resist the pull of oblivion, holding on to a thread of divine grace woven through the dark. The belief was a fringe one, largely forgotten outside isolated monastic circles, but it carried profound meaning. Breath was life's hymn, and prayer its melody in the darkest hour. Yet this intertwining of breath and spirit sparked theological debate for centuries. Some scholars argued that breath was the literal sign of life bestowed by God, while others contended it was a mere physical process with no spiritual essence. The question lingered, could prayer truly infuse breath with divine power, or was this a hopeful illusion to ease the terror of death? The mystery was never settled, leaving these whispered chants to echo unanswered in crypts and cloisters. As you continue your slow, sacred breathing, you feel that delicate tension between doubt and faith, body and spirit, that makes this ancient skill both terrifying and profoundly sacred. The scholars of old cloisters debated fiercely over the nature of breath. Was it merely a bodily function, or something divine, a spark from the heavens breathed into mortal flesh? This question shaped how monks approached the skill of breathing while buried alive, a mystery that hung heavy in candlelit libraries filled with fragile vellum. To some, breath was the anima, the very essence of the soul's presence within the body, a sacred gift granted by God at the moment of life's beginning. Without breath, life fled, and the soul journeyed into the unknown. Others insisted breath was merely air moving in and out of the lungs, a mechanical necessity, devoid of spiritual meaning. This unresolved debate cast a shadow over survival techniques, intertwining faith and fear in a dance as old as death itself. The theological conundrum led to strange, obscure writings, some describing breath as a divine flame, flickering but eternal, others likening it to a fragile thread connecting earth and heaven. Monks argued whether holding breath in the coffin was an act of defiance against God's will or a humble acceptance of His timing. Was suffocation a punishment, a final test of faith, or a merciful release of the soul? These questions were not academic but deeply practical. How one viewed breath influenced the rituals performed and the mindset necessary for survival beneath the earth. The mystery remains unsolved. Your breath now is not only the key to life but a battleground of belief, a silent witness to an age-old theological puzzle that refuses to be answered. Amid this debate arose the belief that breath was the boundary between worlds, the fragile veil that kept the living tethered to their mortal coil. To lose it was to slip into the eternal night, to hold it was to cling to hope. This paradox, born of scholarly disputes and spiritual fears, haunts every inhale you draw in the coffin's embrace. Your lungs labor not only to fill with air but to carry a soul's worth of questions unanswered, each breath a prayer cast into the void where science, faith, and mystery entwine like shadows beneath the earth. A faint shimmer of hope flickers as you recall the whispered legends of an alchemist's elixir, an enigmatic potion crafted to extend the breath of those trapped beneath the soil's relentless weight. This elixir, said to be distilled from rare herbs and whispered incantations, promised to grant the lungs a prolonged lease on life, slowing the relentless hunger for oxygen as if bending time itself. Recipes for this potion were penned in fragile scrolls, locked away in secret compartments of monastic libraries, their knowledge jealously guarded and steeped in superstition. The ingredients were rumored to include nightshade, belladonna, and a mysterious resin said to hold the breath of the earth itself. Those who sought it risked not only physical peril but spiritual damnation, for meddling with such forbidden craft was a dance with dark forces beyond mortal comprehension. Monks believed the elixir was both a gift and a curse, capable of sustaining the living yet tempting the soul to linger too long between worlds. Some drank it before burial, hoping to outlast the grave's silence, while others feared it might trap the spirit, forever bound to the coffin's cold embrace. The potion's effects were said to dull the panic of suffocation, steadying the heart and calming the mind, granting precious moments where breath could slow to a whisper, prolonging life in defiance of death's claim. Yet none could confirm its efficacy. Accounts were fragmented, and no complete recipe survived. Its very existence teetered on the edge of myth and medicine, a dark secret whispered only in the shadows of forgotten cells. Scholars remained divided. Was this elixir a genuine early attempt at respiratory aid, or merely an allegory for spiritual endurance? The theological risks were profound. Was prolonging breath through alchemy an affront to divine will, an unnatural extension of mortal frailty? Or was it a sacred tool, a final grace bestowed to those caught in the liminal space beneath the earth? This mystery deepens the darkness surrounding your breath now, as the fading air and your slowing pulse intertwine with ancient fears and hopes. The elixir lingers in legend like a ghostly promise, a potion that could turn the tide between death and the fragile dance of life held in the lungs. The chronicles you clutch in your mind tell of the buried alive trials, grueling tests of will and breath, recorded in the margins of forgotten tomes by monks daring enough to face the suffocating earth. These were not mere exercises but solemn ordeals, where novices were sealed beneath shallow graves or in crypts, their breaths measured as carefully as the falling sands of an hourglass. Each trial was a battle against panic, a slow surrender to silence, and a testament to the power of the silent breath. Accounts speak of those who emerged, gasping yet alive, their lungs trained to draw the thinnest thread of air, their spirits hardened by the ritual's dark embrace. Their survival was a whisper against the grave's certainty, a fragile victory that echoed through the cloisters like a forbidden hymn. These trials combined physical endurance with spiritual preparation, prayers murmured beneath the soil, herbs clutched in trembling hands, and the ever-present hope that divine mercy would reach into the earth's cold heart. Monastic records describe how the trials served as both punishment and preparation, a crucible where the soul was tested as much as the body. Some chronicles hint at the secret use of the alchemist's elixir, though such references are veiled in code and symbolism, suggesting a fear of condemnation for those who sought unnatural means to cheat death. Survivors of the trials were believed to possess a sacred knowledge, a communion with the grave's breathless silence that set them apart from the living and the dead alike. Yet these accounts raise scholarly questions. How much was faith and ritual, and how much was simple human resilience? Were these stories embellished to inspire or to warn? The theological implications weighed heavily. Were the trials a path to salvation or a dangerous flirtation with forbidden knowledge? This ancient practice, buried under layers of doubt and fear, still haunts the edges of your breath now. You are not alone in the darkness. The ghosts of those trials linger, their quiet breathing a solemn reminder that the skill of surviving burial alive was once a sacred, if perilous, art. The folklore whispered through village fires and shadowed taverns speaks of the breath of the dead, a fragile link between the living and the spirits trapped beneath the earth. It was said that the breath you draw in the coffin is not merely your own but mingled with echoes of those who came before, souls suspended in limbo, whispering their secrets through the thin veil of air. Villagers believed that breathing while buried alive connected you to these trapped spirits, sharing their fears, their hopes, and their silent prayers for release. Some feared that to master the breath was to invite their presence, while others sought communion, believing that the breath of the dead held ancient wisdom and protection against the shadows that lurk beyond the grave. This fringe belief wove together survival and spiritual resonance, suggesting that breath was a shared currency in the dark world beneath the soil. Amulets carved with protective sigils were sometimes placed inside coffins to ward off malevolent spirits who might seek to claim the living breath for their own. In some regions, a whispered chant accompanied each breath, intended to keep the soul anchored and repel restless phantoms drawn to the scent of life. These rituals blurred the line between medicine and magic, breathing and haunting, survival and possession. The breath of the dead was more than myth. It was a fragile bridge between realms, one that could sustain or consume the living trapped beneath the earth's cold embrace. Yet scholars remain divided on the origins and meanings of these beliefs. Were they simple superstitions born of fear, or echoes of deeper truths about life, death, and the soul's journey? Theological debate questioned whether such breath-sharing could disturb the natural order or offer a path to spiritual awakening. This tension lingers in the air you draw now, as your breath becomes a silent prayer, a call into the void, and a whispered promise that even in the deepest darkness, life reaches out to the shadows and the shadows reach back. The theology surrounding suffocation in medieval thought is a labyrinth of fear and reverence, where breath was seen as the fragile thread that tethered the soul to the mortal realm. Theologians grappled with the idea that as breath fades, so too does the soul's hold on the body, raising questions about the moment death truly begins. Is suffocation a swift release, a merciful passage into the afterlife, or a cruel torment where the soul lingers, trapped in a liminal purgatory? This tension infused burial rites with an eerie urgency, as prayers were hastened to breathe life back into the fading breath, to summon angels to guide the soul's passage, or to shield the living from the restless dead. The breath was no longer mere air but a sacred essence fraught with spiritual peril. Within this theological discourse, the act of breathing beneath the earth was seen as both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it was a sign of life, a divine spark enduring against the odds. On the other, it risked tethering the soul too tightly to the mortal coil, preventing its rightful journey to paradise. Some monks feared that prolonged breath and burial could trap the soul, condemning it to wander the shadows, a restless ghost denied rest. Theological writings spoke of breath shadows, spectral remnants clinging to the earthly plane, born from souls caught between life and death by the breath's lingering thread. This belief shaped burial prayers and rites, emphasizing the delicate balance between honoring life's breath and releasing the soul to its eternal rest. This dark theological puzzle surrounds your own breath now as the coffin's air grows thin, each inhale a prayer, each exhale a surrender. The mystery remains unresolved, whether breath is a sacred gift to be cherished or a chain that binds the soul to earthly torment. You breathe on, caught in this ancient tension, the silent dance of life and death unfolding with every whispered breath beneath the cold earth. Your breath echoes faintly in the darkness, bouncing off the cold wooden walls and the packed earth beyond, creating ghostly repetitions that seem to speak in tongues only the buried can hear. These echoes shape the rhythm of your breathing, a spectral guide that teaches patience and stillness in the oppressive silence. Monks long ago believed that the tomb's very acoustics held power, that the reverberations of breath could calm the mind and steady the soul, weaving a delicate web of sound and shadow to protect the living from despair. The echoes became a silent companion, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, life murmurs quietly, waiting for a chance to return to the light. In the dim crypts where monks practiced, these breathing echoes were said to align with the heartbeat of the earth itself, creating a harmony between body and tomb. This phenomenon was not merely physical but spiritual, a form of meditative breathwork that tuned the practitioner to the subterranean world. Whispered accounts speak of novices who, guided by these echoes, learned to slow their breath to a near imperceptible murmur, fooling the darkness into granting them time. The echoes became a sacred metronome, marking moments suspended between life and death, a rhythm of survival whispered from the depths of forgotten tombs. Scholars remain intrigued yet puzzled by these accounts. Was this echo-guided breathwork a practical method born of sensory adaptation, or a metaphor for spiritual attunement to the grave's silence? The idea straddles science and mysticism, offering a haunting image of breath as both sound and spirit reverberating through the tomb. As you listen to the faint echoes of your own breathing, you find yourself entwined in this ancient dance, caught between silence and sound, between life's fragile breath and the grave's eternal hush. The skill of breathing while buried alive, once whispered in monastic shadows and etched into fragile parchments, slowly vanished beneath centuries of fear and silence. As the medieval world gave way to new eras, the knowledge was deemed too perilous, too intertwined with forbidden rituals and dark mysteries. Laws forbade premature burial, but the skill itself faded like a ghost, buried alongside those who dared practice it. The art of the silent breath was lost not because it was ineffective, but because society recoiled from the uncomfortable truth. Death was not always immediate, and the boundary between life and the grave was perilously thin. This knowledge became taboo, hidden away to protect souls from the terror of suffocation, and to shield minds from the unsettling questions it raised. Monastic orders that once guarded these secrets disbanded or reformed, and their grim manuscripts were scattered or destroyed. The ritual of the quiet breath, the breath of shadows, the lung exercises, all faded into obscurity, replaced by the cold finality of modern burial rites. Yet whispers remain, like the faintest breath on the wind, suggesting that the skill never truly died. Some say it lives on in hidden societies, in esoteric practices buried beneath the veneer of orthodoxy. Others believe it to be a curse, a dangerous knowledge best forgotten, lest it tempt souls to defy the natural order. The collapse of this skill marks a silence deeper than any coffin, a loss of ancient wisdom swallowed by time and terror. You, lying in the narrow dark, feel this collapse around you like a shroud. The breath you draw is more than air, it is a relic of forgotten rites, a fragment of a lost world where survival was an act of faith and defiance. As the silence presses close, you wonder if this skill was a gift or a curse, a secret whispered too softly to be heard, too dangerous to be remembered. The skill may be lost, but the breath lingers, fragile and fleeting, a final thread connecting you to those ancient masters of the silent breath. A whispered warning rises from the depths as you draw your final, fragile breaths beneath the earth's cold weight. The gift of breathing alive is as much a curse as a blessing. The monks spoke of this shadowed lesson in hushed tones. To breathe while buried alive is to dance on the edge of oblivion, caught between life's tenuous hold and death's inevitable claim. Each breath is a silent pact with the grave, a fragile thread stretched thin by desperation and faith. It is a skill wrapped in darkness, where mastery brings not freedom but a haunting awareness of your own mortality pressed close against the coffin's walls. You breathe not to live but to endure, trapped in a liminal space where time and hope both fray and falter. The final lesson is etched in shadow. Breathing while buried alive demands a surrender to the earth and an embrace of the silence that follows. It teaches that life's breath is a fragile flame, flickering precariously in the darkness, neither extinguished nor fully alive. To survive the silent grave is to carry a mark, an eternal whisper of those who walk the thin line between worlds. This knowledge, ancient and cursed, waits in the silence for those brave enough to listen. If your candle has not gone out yet, you might be ready for the next book. There are more books. There are always more books. And the breath you hold now is but the first step into their shadowed pages. The earth settles softly above you, a silent shroud that seals you within its cold embrace. Yet the breath you hold is not just air, it is a fragile thread that binds your soul to this world, a whispered secret passed down through forgotten ages. The monks who mastered the silent breath knew that to breathe while buried alive is to walk a thin line between defiance and surrender, life and death entwined in a delicate dance. This skill, long lost to fear and time, carries with it a haunting truth: survival beneath the soil is not freedom, but a slow communion with the abyss. As your breath slows, mingling with the quiet hum of the earth, you feel the ancient knowledge settle within you, a dark inheritance from those who dared to defy the grave. The silence around you is thick, yet within it, the faintest whispers stir, beckoning you onward. There are more books. There are always more books. And beyond these pages lies a deeper darkness, waiting for those who have truly listened to the silent breath. If your candle has not gone out yet, you might be ready for the next book.